rights and duty to welcome Mr. Nehchal Sandhu, Deputy National Security Advisor, to deliver the keynote address, The Realities of Terrorism in India.
Dr. Ramamurthy, distinguished members of the American delegation, members and associates of the National Institute for Advanced Studies, Bangalore. Thank you in the first instance, Dr. Ramamurthy, for giving me this opportunity to join you for the first day of this workshop. And I might preface what I have to say by sort of stating that, at least in the Indian context, those of us who have been practitioners of counterterrorism over the years, 30 and more, have not had a sufficiently wide and deep interface with the scientific community in India, as a result of which I think all that we could have derived from that end of the world has not become available to us in the manner in which should have had. I will therefore dedicate some of what I have to say to what we perceive to be the gaps in countering terrorism and what we believe the scientific community could come in and help with. I want to first take note of what Dr. Ramamurthy said in terms of international terrorism remaining an abiding challenge and the possibility that its burgeoning profile is going to affect larger sections of the world community. I'm happy to note that in the Indian context, the quantum of terrorist violence has been consistently going down. While that is a good sign, I have also to admit that terrorists still retain the capacity to strike hard, to strike at will, and carry out incidents which result in mass casualties. And of course, you have the November 26, 2008 example right before you, where more than 100 lives were lost in a multi-scene attack which persisted over 3 days until we could surmount the challenge. So certainly, even in the Indian context, even as the numbers of incidents have gone down, and I'll have occasion to mention some of those figures, we remain aware of the reality that the ugly face of terrorism can come up at any place and certainly precipitate incidents that result in mass casualties with all the attendant issues that they create for the administration to handle. For the purposes of this session, I thought I would limit my assessment of the current situation and the reality of terrorism to two theaters, and those I think are the more vital theaters as far as we are concerned. There is Jammu and Kashmir, which has been the venue of terrorism since 1989, and then you have terrorism in the northeast, where it's been festering for longer years. In both these cases of terrorism, there is a huge external factor, and I'm sure members of the American delegation know as much as we do about the external inputs to terrorism that sustain violent activity in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. I just want to say here that the forces or the groups that carry out terrorism in India or in J&K specifically are not exclusively focused on India. And there is therefore a need for the world community to take note of the fact that the same forces pose terrorist threat in many other parts of the world. And I'm tempted to recall that when we first started our joint working groups on counterterrorism with the United States in 1999, our assertions about the threat of the Lashkar-e-Taiba to the American mainland were met with disbelief for a long time, until the then coordinator for counterterrorism, Michael Sheehan, began to understand us and began to take note of the extensive documentation that existed in the Lashkar's own libraries, so to say, in their own products, which indicated a threat to the United States of America. And of course, you've since had a few cases where Lashkar has been directly implicated in attacks on the American mainland, besides what they have been doing in closer theaters. So let me just say that since I've talked about the Lashkar, and I don't believe the thesis that has been put out by the American side that the Lashkar is a franchisee or a subordinate outfit to the Al-Qaeda. I think ideologically There's no way in which the two can get together. Secondly, the Al-Qaeda is not as well organized an outfit as the Lashkar. The numbers of the Lashkar are much, much higher. And denominationally and ideologically, there's no meeting ground between the Al-Qaeda and the Lashkar. But that apart, I think we need to take note that Lashkar has adopted the program of global jihad. And I would strongly urge members of the American delegation to take note of the fact that this single organization, which today has a membership of about 35 or 3,700 people, is the next big threat to the world. And already, even soon after it came into being in the mid-90s and the early 2000s, we had evidence of Lashkar activity in Iraq, we had Lashkar activity in Chechnya, we had Lashkar activity in Dagestan, we had Lashkar activity as far as Kosovo. So they withdrew from those territories for good reason, to reinvigorate and to reassemble their capacities. And we now have, in the last 2.5 years, recreation of a new presence of the Lashkar in a very significant way in the eastern provinces of Afghanistan, notably Kunnad and Nuristan, which are only serving as sort of holding ground and platforms for actions further eastwards, further westwards into other parts of Afghanistan, and more particularly the targeting that they've done in Kabul over a period of time. Some of these attacks have been carried out by the Lashkar independently, others in conjunction with outfits like the Haqqani network. But the fact remains that the westward mobility that the Lashkar has established indicates that it has designs much, much bigger than what one might have expected them to do. There are other outfits like the Harkat Quad and the Jaish being part of it, and so many others. But I don't think any other group represents the kind of threat that the Lashkar does. And therefore, it's only appropriate that the Lashkar should have been listed as a terrorist outfit by the United States. And there has been continuing efforts over a period of time to make sure that the channels of finance that sustain the apparatus of the Lashkar are systematically disrupted. And a lot of work in that regard has been done by the US Treasury Department. And all that contributes towards placing halters on its plans to extend its global jihad. Within India, I had talked of J&K, and I want to come back to it, and some figures might reveal what the situation is. And if you go back to 2001, the beginning of the last decade, we used to have 3,500 odd incidents per year, which translates to 300 incidents per month, 300 incidents per, and we used to have 1,520 odd casualties in the year. Last year, we had 113 incidents, 113, as opposed to 3,505 in 2001. And we had 68 casualties, as opposed to 1,520. I would therefore like to make the claim that there has been significant success that the security forces, all of them put together, have registered in dealing with this challenge. The other very clear indicator is that from a high number of 3,700 terrorists in the province of J&K, you're now down to 429 odd terrorists. That also indicates that there has been significant attrition and that the capacity of the Lashkar to rejuvenate and to reinvigorate its outfit in J&K stands hit to quite an extent. Two broad strategies have paid off in J&K. One has been a very assiduous effort to create obstacles along what we call the line of control and the international border in J&K, the line of control with Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and the international border with Pakistan. And we've done that through two means. One is the erection of a physical obstacle, which is the fence, and the second is deployment of high-tech surveillance devices, whether those are handheld thermal imagers, long-range observation systems, battlefield surveillance radars, UAVs, and whatever else. So we have a huge combination of equipment and material on the ground to try and maintain the integrity of the fence and to detect every effort that is made to cross the fence. Notwithstanding these efforts, I have to admit that every year 300 to 400 terrorists try to cross the fence, and some do get through. And it's our reckoning that in the last 1 year, we had, in 2013, we had 100 plus terrorists who managed to get through. Now you might wonder how this happens. There are two broad reasons. One is that in winter, with the heavy precipitation that takes place, our fence is only 3.3 meters high. The snow depth can go up to 4 or 5 meters, and the obstacle remains non-existent, and you can actually walk over the fence. The only challenge is that the people attempting to do that have to be adept at icecraft and snowcraft, and you have to be mountaineers too, so there's going to be fixed rope and pitons and jumars and so on, which obviously means that while you can have success, the numbers that can do it is going to be lower. The second part is that once the snows and the ice recedes, such parts of the fence as have remained under it become a tangled mess of steel and so on. And you have therefore to re-erect it. And 30% of the fence gets damaged every year, and we re-erect that at considerable cost. But more importantly, it takes us a month or two to re-erect it. And the interregnum between the time it's exposed as damaged and the time when it actually becomes, when you put it up again, is 2 months. So that's another area which leads to a situation where infiltration could take place. And the second element, one, as I said, was to stop terrorists from coming in. The second element is the multifaceted way in which we detect and neutralize terrorists within the state of J&K. And there are three broad ways in which that is done. We have what's called a counterterrorism grid, which means the state of J&K has been gridded. We've actually drawn squares and given responsibility to specific units for their respective territories, and there are engaged, and there are means by which they collaborate and so on. The second part of the program has been the intelligence-driven operations, whether that intelligence is extracted out of technical means or out of physical observation through human sources. There is an ability to today act in a very quick way on that intelligence, and that's how losses are inflicted on terrorist groups. And thirdly, there has been a sustained campaign to ensure that people whose normal activities are circumscribed by violence perpetrated by terrorists are not only liberated from that stranglehold, but are also able to pursue their avocations, to participate in our democratic traditions, and become members of the Legislative Assembly, and so on and so forth, so that you have pretty cleanly elected people who can justifiably and appropriately represent the interests of the people and seek recourse and remedies. So these two methods, one being more military in content without so much use of military, and the other in terms of mobilization of the people and making them realize the efficacies of the alternate mechanisms of grievance redressal. In the Northeast, all states put together, I've got figures for 2004 and then 2013. We had 1076 incidents in 2004 with 500 odd casualties, and in 2013 we had 732 incidents with 125 casualties. Now what you need to note here is that the number of incidents has not significantly gone down in 10 years. We've only managed to shave off 25% in terms of numbers of incidents. But you've brought the casualties down to 25% of the total, from 500 down to 125. So that, I suspect, is something that we can claim to be a significant advance. And the troublesome territories of the 7 states, we have no significant issues in Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram, and Tripura. And the 4 states where we have issues are Manipur, Assam, Meghalaya, and Nagaland. Now we've pursued different strategies in different areas. For example, in Nagaland and Assam, for the longest period ever, we've had dialogues with terrorist groups. We've brought them overboard. As a result, for example, in Assam, you today have 21 autonomous councils. These are specific jurisdictions wherein people's representatives, essentially dominated by the ethnicity of that particular area, they have the capacity to decide on where they want to apply development funds, what they want to do with the money that becomes available, build roads, build schools, and so on and so forth. That has been one part of the model, and the other one, of course, has been a joint command between the army and the paramilitary forces to deal with the threat as it emerges in different areas. Now, I have also to say that in Assam, where this issue of negotiations had led to autonomous councils, I don't think we reached the end of the road, because when you settle with a group and you invest them with power, elected folks out of those with power, there is always a remnant group that remains outside the gains of office and so on, and those guys take to insurgencies and so on and so forth. And the Bodoland territorial area district is certainly one example where over a period of 15 years, we've had 3 sets of people who have taken to insurgency one after the other time, and we still have a persisting problem. So I'm not very sure whether distribution of largesse through the elected representatives of people in these small councils is ultimately the answer. But of course, police actions and paramilitary actions have continued, and that has led to some dropping in the number of casualties. There's a greater degree of security. In Nagaland, we've had talks with one of the factions of the Nagaland Socialist Council, and that's the Isaac Muiwa faction. It's been quite effective. For the last more than a decade, we've had that peace, as a result of which violence has gone down. But the other outfits don't feel constrained, and they have continued with some degree of violence. Fortunately for us, it's struggle for supremacy between these various groups that leads to fratricidal killing as opposed to impacting on the civilians. So it's a different character of violence that takes place. Here too, it's important to mention that there's an externality to the inspirations that drive these forces of terrorism. The availability of territories in Bangladesh, and now more so the availability of territories in northern Myanmar to these groups, have provided to them areas of sanctuary where they can resuscitate. Those are platforms through which fund collections take place, and they are funneled into the territories in India. Those are areas where weapon acquisitions take place. And I don't know how many of you saw the news about 6 or 7 days back, wherein the Bangladesh court has convicted 10 people, including Paresh Barua, for having siphoned in or having attempted to bring in 10 truckloads of weapons into our territory. Those were intercepted in Bangladesh. Paresh Barua happens to be the chief of one of the Assamese insurgent groups. But this is just to sort of tell you that these folks have enjoyed the hospitality of certain elements in Bangladesh and Myanmar, and they continue to do so in Myanmar, as a result of which they are able to escape the actions of the forces as and when those are planned and executed. Another point that is interesting in terms of geography is that the Chinese state of Yunnan, the southern Chinese state of Yunnan, is not very far from northern Myanmar. And we have ample evidence of our insurgents who are usually headquartered in and around Taga in Myanmar Naga Hills, taking shelter in a place called Ruili, which is just across the border in China on the road to Kunming. So here again there's an externality. Some of you may have read about two or 3 years back about the interdiction of a guy called Anthony Shimre, who was a Naga insurgent who had gone to Thailand and contracted with the gun runners in Thailand for the delivery of weapons worth several $1 million, of which he had paid $1 million in advance. He was intercepted. He is today the subject of a prosecution in court in Delhi, a case that has been investigated by the National Investigation Agency. And so there was that exposure of the plot. But interestingly, we've just had an infiltration of 161 AK-47 rifles in 3 different tranches across the Myanmar border into Nagaland. This represents part delivery of some of the materials that had been indented, so to say, by Anthony Shimre. So we're having difficulty in keeping track of what's going on there. A third matter that I wanted to refer to in the context of my assertions with regard to Lashkar-e-Taiba is that you would have come across the term Indian Mujahideen, and you would have come upon reports in the press about this group causing terrorist actions, and most lately you would have seen that Yasin Bhatkal was arrested. He is the leader of the outfit, and earlier than that, Saudi Arabia had repatriated a guy called Zabiuddin Ansari. Now, what is important to realize is that while these people are Indian nationals quite clearly, and there is no foreign component in them, but each one of them has been subverted and taken to Pakistan, usually through a third country in the Middle East and sometimes even Iran, to Pakistan, trained in the camps there, and then sent back to carry out terrorist actions. What is also more interesting is that it's not a one-off. It's not just a question of being taken there, trained, and then sent back. Guidance flows from Pakistan, from nodal points in Pakistan, through clandestine communication channels about selection of targets, about timing of attacks, about positioning of weapons and hardware, about supply of money, and so on and so forth. So there's an established externality about the way in which the Indian Mujahideen group, for whatever it's worth, is able to carry out its activities. Let me now come to the area of where science and technology, where experts like yourselves can possibly play a role in assisting the state apparatus in dealing with terrorism. Let me come to the first one. Much of the identification of potential recruits, their enlistment and motivation, even in India, takes place on the internet. Most of our recruits are younger people. Most of our people are people who understand how to use the net. And I'm not very sure whether the audience here is aware of what the penetration of the internet is as far as India is concerned. In a 1.2 billion person population, we have 210 million internet subscribers. 38 million of them are on terrestrial broadband, and the remaining 170 odd million are on mobile platforms. While I do acknowledge that most of the mobile platforms are patronized by youth, and they're essentially used for social networks like Facebook and Twitter and so on and so forth, and for exchanging trivialities, the fact is that there is a segment of people who avails of this availability for purposes quite different from what any peaceful man would like to pursue. And not just this, not just for one-on-one transactions, but there are groups on the internet, there are chat rooms that remain exclusive to people who are swayed by a certain kind of ideology, and those swamps, if you will, tend to entrench radical positions in individuals, and those then sometimes translate into terrorist activity. But I have to say here that ability of the law enforcement agencies to keep contemporaneous track of what is happening on the internet, in chat rooms and separately, is and remains a big challenge. One of the reasons is that unlike in America, we are not permitted to look at all the traffic that occurs. We are permitted under law to approach authorities to get warrants for specific targets. We can't just say every guy in Bangalore or some people in Bangalore are doing this, so therefore we want to be monitoring all the bandwidth through Bangalore, or for that matter any other part. So we have to identify targets. Those may or may not be approved. Once approved, they're subjected to a system of review, and therefore there's quite a challenge. But still, even when we do get the traffic that we suspect is related to terrorism, our ability to decrypt some of that traffic is suspect, is inadequate, and we therefore remain generally unaware, frankly quite unaware, of all the activity that's taking place on the internet in terms of radicalizing people. We are not yet permitted to do what is done in the West, something that you call IBHS, Internet-Based Human Sources, where agents and operatives masquerade as X or Y, enter groups, and then help to take them down. Our law doesn't permit us to conduct such sting operations. We're not permitted to, go undercover and do this. So certainly, internet is one broad area. The other area is communication. And when I talk of communication, it's a huge range. Besides the internet communications we talked about, it has been GSM and CDMA phones. It's been satellite phones. It's been mobiles, as I said. But most recently, the challenge that we face is from IP-based radios. And we also face challenges in terms of the RF spectrum, where GSM networks of the neighboring country are being spread into our country through high-powered extensor networks. And much of that is not in the voice domain, much of that is in the data domain. And we can discuss this subsequently to try and understand as to what kind of an approach we would need to take on this. Also, chat groups have been set up, small ones, password protected and whatever else, for specific conspiracies. Those are short-lived, and those again become very difficult to keep track of. And of course, the bigger challenge is the area of encryption, and that is a huge issue, and we still haven't got to the bottom of many of these. I recall that about 3 years back, we had recovered a device which was mated. It's like a small calculator, like a keypad, attached to a VHF radio, which had the keypad had Arabic alphabets on it, and they would feed in their message in Arabic, and that little keypad would encrypt it and send it out in burst mode through the VHF radio. I shared it with our colleagues. I shared the device with our colleagues in the CIA, and it took them 2 years plus, and we still don't really know how that worked. And we have innovative designs like this that keep coming up, and which defeat our very efforts to keep track of what's going on. Another huge area is explosives, and there are three specific areas where we have difficulty. Some of it, I guess, the scientific community can't help us with, and that's the first one. That is the ability of terrorists to use materials of common use and fabricate bombs. Glycerine, soap, ammonium nitrate, potassium chlorate, sulfur, charcoal, and so on and so forth. But of course, we realize that even as these are materials that can be easily connected, the detonation mechanisms are not so easily available. Those are controlled materials, whether it is an electric detonator or it's a detonator at the end of a fuse wire. But we've had difficulties in the area of tracking detonators. Detonators are issued for mining and for various other legit purposes, blasting rock for building roads and so on. And we still don't have a means of going back to the last point of sale of those detonators. We know they've been manufactured by X. They went in lot Y to a certain state, but thereafter we can't. So we're hoping to get hold of a mechanism whereby each detonator can be tracked all the way from point of manufacture to the point of use, and we haven't really got a worthwhile solution with regard to that. The second area where we have difficulties with regard to detonation mechanisms. Now, of course, in the old days, it used to be a command wire kind of a detonation, which means the charge would be linked with the battery quite some distance away, and somebody would actually press a switch and allow it to be and make it detonate. These days, they have timers at the other end, or they are able to distance themselves from that, and we have difficulties with that. Timing delays, not just the electronic ones, but even the physical manual ones. Like, for example, getting hold of a vial of acid, putting in a newspaper plug, turning it over, and leaving it inside an explosive compound. And as the acid eats through the newspaper, it comes into contact with the explosive, and boom, you have a problem. Of course, it's not always possible to be precise when it comes to a detonation mechanism like that, but these are the kind of detonation mechanisms that have been used. Light-dependent resistors, for example, programmed either way. Put into a room like this, for example, when you come in and turn the lights on in the morning, it'll get activated, and 40 minutes down the line or 1 hour down the line, it'll detonate. Conversely, they do it the other way. Put it into a cinema hall. Once the lights go off, the ambient conditions are met, and there is a detonation. So, light-dependent resistors are a huge, huge means of separating the perpetrator from the event. You've had other cases where loosely we call them solar-powered rockets. These are BM-21 rockets that are placed 4 to 5 kilometers away from the objective, roughly targeted. And again, you have a similar device like an LDR. As sunlight reaches a certain level, they trigger off the rocket and it goes and lands where it's meant to land. Usually it's quite inaccurate, but it does have a pretty lethal capacity, even if it's off the mark. Cellular phones as triggers and wireless sets as triggers, they've gone away from the original one where the mere establishment of a carrier or the passage of a ring was sufficient to detonate a target, a device. Today, once the communication is established, not until they have fed in a 4 or 6 digit code would the detonation occur. So it's not unusual for them to wait for an army convoy to approach, to get the carrier through, and then wait until they have the target in mind, and then they put in the code and detonate. We have neither been able to get effective pre-initiators, because what we would like to do is to run a vehicle which is putting out a barrage of frequencies at sufficient strength which would cause it to detonate, nor have we been able to jam the signals when this transaction takes place. And then, of course, there are the third part of the physical part. They've leveraged science to create shaped charges like claymore mines, so that the maximum fury of the device is directed in a certain manner. In fact, if you see the Indian Mujahideen bomb blasts, whether it's Pune or it's Ahmedabad or wherever, you find that they create a boat-shaped structure of wood. They line it on the inside with metal. They put the explosive into that in that boat-shaped way. Then they put ball bearings in front of it, stick in a detonator from the back, and with a timer and whatever else. So when the blast takes place, it goes in a certain direction. Equally, they use copper-backed shapes to launch their charge, the maximum impact of the charge in a certain way. And we've discovered over a period of time that even bulletproof cars are not able to sustain the projectiles that come out of these with high velocity. Booby-trapped bodies is another one where we have a huge challenge. They kill somebody and then booby-trap the body so that anybody who comes to inspect the body for the inquest or whatever gets blown up in the secondary explosion. And we still don't have an answer for that. Now, we dealt with the JIEDDO of the American government on detection of IEDs below the ground and elsewhere. And I have to say that the 2 or 3 programs that we ran with them did not give us a satisfactory means of detecting and disrupting IEDs that are put into roads 2 or 3 feet below the ground. We just couldn't detect any of those because there is insignificant emission of vapor. It's difficult to detect, and the metallic parts are too far away for a DSMD, a deep search metal detector, to do any worthwhile detection. Another area where we have difficulty is, at least in 3 recent instances, we've had terrorists dig tunnels under the line of control. These tunnels are typically 3 to 4 meters under the ground. They're usually 5 feet high, about 3 feet wide. They run for about 700 or 800 meters. They start 200 meters on the other side of the LOC and come 500 meters into ours. We've tried 2 broad techniques. We've tried ground penetration radar to try and detect them. We've not been successful. We've tried conductivity tests, and we've not been successful. So this is another dark area where we have huge issues, and we fear that this will be, now that we have very strong defenses on the surface in terms of good fences and so on, burrowing under these and deep under these is going to be quite a thing for them. On weapons, incidentally, they've studied much, and in recent cases in central India, we've had a large number of cases where the helicopters that we use for casualty evacuation, or for flying commanders from point A to point B, or for flying policemen from point A to point B, have been struck at just those sensitive points which would bring them down. And we've had cases of hydraulic failure, we've had cases of the tail rotor knocked off, we've had cases of fuel tank punctured, and so we've had to get into a program wherein we are now protecting these, we're bulletproofing these areas of a helicopter. We're not worrying about the boom and those other areas which won't create a problem. But certainly where the control systems are, where the fuel systems are, where the hydraulics are, we're trying to do something about it. But in the case of, let's say, the tail rotor, there's nothing you can do about it. It remains vulnerable, and you have an issue. Another area, a relatively soft area, but certainly where they've done a lot in terms of using technology against us, is replication of travel documents and identity papers. Whether it's our election ID cards, or it's our driving licenses, or it's our passports, and so on. The kind of counterfeiting they do is of such a high quality, it becomes very difficult to detect. We've tried 4 or 5 ways of embedding security features into these. Some of them have worked, some have not worked, but certainly this is an area where we need to move quickly to be able to thwart their plans. Poisoning of water supply. This has been a declared intent on their part. We've had only 2 cases so far. Fortunately, in both those cases, the quantity of cyanide put into the volume of water was too small, and therefore it didn't create the kind of impact that they were intending to create. But this is certainly within the realm of their plans and abilities, and therefore detection mechanisms for even small quantities of poisonous substances, not necessarily only cyanide, in huge volumes of water that become available for consumption to offices or residential colonies is an issue. And one of our colleagues, I think Dr. Augustine, talked in terms of leakage of nuclear materials. We worry about the dirty bomb. We haven't had any real instance where it's been used in our territory, but we've heard a lot of talk about it, and that's another area where we think we will need a lot of help, and it's quite a challenge. So with these words, I'd like to close what I had to say, but we still have, I think, about 17 or 18 minutes for interaction on this subject, and I'd be happy to respond to any queries. And of course, we have enlightened members of the panel out here who also might want to pitch in with their own understanding of the threats and means of negating them. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, Dr. Ramurthy has to go away to take care of another function that we have today.